Well, hello there. I'm Martin from Reach Leicester, and glad to be with you for today's daily devotional. We're going to be looking at Isaiah chapter 53. But first of all, if you want the opportunity to worship, then click on the link for today's psalm. I am fascinated by the fact that in his first letter to the Corinthians, in the first chapter, in verse 20, starting at 22, Paul writes this: Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. We preach Christ crucified, he says. So often I think we find ourselves in the sort of society that we're in, actually preaching Christ resurrected without emphasizing the crucifixion. That it's like we try to attract people with all the blessings and the hope and the joy of the resurrection, which of course is part of the message. But we sometimes forget that in order to get to the resurrection, you go through the crucifixion. And in order to understand the crucifixion, you go back to the beginning of the gospel, to the synagogue in Nazareth, where Jesus first proclaimed good news. And Paul emphasizes preaching Christ crucified, the sacrifice that he made for the people of the time, as well as people for the future, for the people who had heard him preaching the good news of the kingdom without understanding that there was a crucifixion and resurrection to come. And the crucifixion is at the center of it all. This is why Paul suggests we preach Christ crucified. And nowhere else is that crucifixion described more vividly than in Isaiah and chapter 53, a prophecy from Isaiah of what was to happen on the cross. So all I want to do today really is to share that with you, to read it to you, for you to meditate on all the verses of Isaiah 53. If you want, you can turn the sound off and just read the words. And then we'll just finish at the end of the psalm, at the end of Isaiah's passage, like a psalm, isn't it? But the end of Isaiah's passage, and I'll leave you to reflect on it and pray on it yourself. Who has believed what he has heard from us? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and makes intercession for the transgressors.